Facepalm America. I'm Beowulf Rockland. FacepalmAmerica.com is, as always, the place where you can go to get more information about the show, to connect with us on social media, and to listen to past episodes. Thank you so much for listening today. There is an incredible amount going on in the political world. And for that reason, and as we do every week, I have reached out to John Rothmann, the host of Around the Political World with John Rothmann, and he is here with us again. John, welcome back to Facepalm America. Thanks so much for being here.
May I say it is always a high honor and great personal privilege.
Well, thank you so much. Wow. So we had discussed in the past the various efforts in different states to remove Donald Trump from the ballot because of the 14th Amendment concerns that he had engaged in insurrection and therefore was not eligible to run for high office. And the Supreme Court of the United States today rendered a unanimous verdict on that.
No surprise. I think you and I talked about it several weeks ago. I've talked about it on my podcast. The Supreme Court, in my judgment, made the correct decision. Donald Trump should not be removed from the ballot for insurrection because he's never been convicted of insurrection. He's never been charged with insurrection. What is more important than what President Trump just talked about in his remarks is the immunity case. And I believe the Supreme Court will rule strongly next month that Donald Trump does not have blanket immunity. And that will be very significant because that opens the doors for Prosecutor Smith's approach. So I think we're right on track. The only thing that concerns me is the question of timing.
Right.
I think the American people have a right to know whether Donald Trump is guilty of the charges against him, 91 separate charges. And I would point out to you, and I think it's very important, that Mr. Weisselberg, his accountant, if you will, chief accountant, pled guilty today to a perjury charge. I mean, the reality is that the American people are going to have to make a stark choice in November. Let me say a quick word about Nikki Haley's victory in D.C. No surprise at all. But tomorrow, which is Super Tuesday, I expect Donald Trump will essentially emerge with enough delegates to claim a lock on the nomination. Be another couple of weeks before he's able to really cement the majority he needs for the Republican convention. But there is no doubt in my mind that Donald Trump, unless something dramatic happens, will be the Republican nominee for president. More significant was Nikki Haley's statement that she is not pledging now to support Donald Trump for president, which means that Donald Trump will have a problem, and that is a divided Republican Party. Now, it's true that the overwhelming majority of Republicans support Donald Trump, but it is also true that all it will take will be defections by a small group, and that would be enough to deny him the presidency, no matter what the poll that was released yesterday shows with a 4% victory over Joe Biden. I just don't believe it. I don't see it. And I think that the problems Donald Trump has will be magnified and will grow in the days ahead. And by the way, the other thing we learned is Donald Trump is not truthful. His
really?
Continual harping. Yeah, well, it's a big surprise. Donald Trump's continual harping on the fact that the 2020 election was stolen, his comments on immigration, the man simply is unable to tell the truth. And I hope the American people see that.
I certainly hope so. It is interesting to note, although perhaps incidental, that Nikki Haley won her first primary, that in Washington, D.C. It won't really have an impact on the number of delegates or her ability to get the nomination. Do you think there is a chance that Nikki Haley will, and I've seen some put forward the idea today, run as a third-party candidate? And if she were to do that, what impact do you think it might have on the general election?
I do not believe she will run as a third-party candidate. I think she is going to do what Ron DeSantis is doing and what others are doing, and that is for Donald Trump to take a huge defeat, which I think is inevitable. And if Donald Trump were to win, she's still looking toward 2028, and I think she will stay in the Republican Party. There is no viable third-party candidate at this moment, nor do I think it is possible for the third-party candidate to do anything but spoil the election. So,
but
in my mind,
could she spoil it for Trump if she did so, or do you think she would be more likely to spoil it for Biden, if anything?
I don't think so.
Providing an alternative.
Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think I am. I think the people who will not vote for Donald Trump will not vote for Donald Trump. Period. It doesn't matter what Nikki Haley does or says. There are, I would say, at least 30% of Republicans who have real doubts about Donald Trump. And if they defect from the party and do not vote for Donald Trump, he's deep six. That's all there is to it. The only way Donald Trump wins is if there is an absolutely solid, united Republican Party. And even if there were a solid, united Republican Party, I just don't see it. The big news this last week was Joe Manchin's announcement that he will not seek the presidency under the no labels label, which means that no labels may be on the ballot, but they may not have anybody to put on the ballot because people don't vote for a party. They vote for a person. And I think that's also very significant. We understand that third parties basically are spoilers. As I've pointed out in the past, the last third-party candidate to win an election for the presidency was Abraham Lincoln in 1860. So I just don't see that kind of situation. And we had the situation in 2000 with Pat Buchanan and Ralph Nader, and they did spoil things in Florida. But I just don't see it happening this time, at this point anyway.
Well, I am the furthest thing from a supporter of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. that you can imagine. But I will say that in my neighborhood here in Southern Oregon, and I know that yard signs are not an indicator, but I have seen certainly polls say that in many places he has 7, 8, 9% of the vote. Do you think that has a potential to be a spoiler either for Donald Trump or for Joe Biden, because it does not seem as if he is going away?
Well, let's put it this way. To my knowledge, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is not on the ballot in Oregon. And if you're not on the ballot, it doesn't matter.
Right.
Question is, where will Robert F. Kennedy get on the ballot? And by the time the election rolls around and they really deal with it, the simple truth is Robert F. Kennedy Jr. believes in conspiracy theories, opposes vaccinations, and by the way, he had a very admirable record prior to all of this nonsense that he is promulgating. So I don't see Bobby Kennedy Jr. as an issue. If his name were not Bobby Kennedy Jr., he wouldn't even be a factor. Yeah. So I, to be honest, at this point, I don't see him being a major player, particularly in a state like Oregon, which you live in. And, if he got on the ballot there, maybe it'd make a difference, but I don't think so. May I also say my expectation is that people who would vote for Robert F. Kennedy Jr. in all likelihood would be more inclined to vote for Trump than Biden.
That's my thought as well. I'm certainly hoping that that's the case. With regard to the Supreme Court coming out and saying that they are going to be ruling on on presidential immunity, that came out last week after we spoke. How concerned are you about the fact that ruling is not going to come out for another 2 months? I mean, you talked about the timing.
No, it's 1 month. It's April 22nd.
Okay.
Well, that's when they are going to hear the case. So you're right. It'll be 2 months before they announce a decision. I have to tell you bluntly, I just don't see the Supreme Court ruling in favor of Donald Trump. Let's assume for a minute that Donald Trump wins and there's blanket presidential immunity. That would change the whole balance of power in this country in terms of the power of the presidency. And it would vindicate Richard Nixon's line that if the president does it, it's legal. So that's the first thing. I just don't see the Supreme Court doing that. The second aspect is if he loses, then he's in big trouble because Mr. Smith will then have the ability to really push forward, and lower courts will have to deal with a whole bunch of issues as well. The other thing nobody is taking into account is when Smith gets Mike Pence on the stand and Mike Pence tells the truth, I think Donald Trump's in deep trouble. Not good news for Donald Trump, although he may try to spin it that way. And that's not a position I take because I don't like Donald Trump. I think it's the political reality and the legal reality.
Yeah.
Can you imagine the court ruling that the president is above the law? I just don't think so.
Well, I would certainly hope not. And with regard to changing the very essence of the power structure in Washington, I would hope that the Supreme Court would also not do that, and certainly precedent would be against it. Although, as you and I have discussed, many unprecedented things have taken place in the last 8 years or so in the United States of America, and I would hope hope that we wouldn't be, suddenly shocked and surprised by such a thing happening. I don't know whether to believe if the traditional conventions and traditional methods of operation really exist any longer in the United States and certainly in Washington, D.C.
Well, you're right. A lot of traditions are out the window. Certainly, as a political junkie who loves to explore the past and what could have happened and would have happened, imagine if we had an open convention at the Republican National Convention, or if something happened to Joe Biden and there were an open Democratic convention. I mean, those are all points of speculation. And I've speculated about them in my podcast, and I've speculated about them with you, and I will continue to do so. But the way it stands today, it's Trump versus Biden, and the American people will have a stark choice to make. That's the reality.
With regard to the polling numbers that you've seen, and I've seen them too, and we've talked about them here on the show, both generally and in swing states such as Michigan and Wisconsin, it changes, it goes back and forth, but we have seen President Biden be down by 4 or 5 points in many of these polls. And I know it is not close to the election, and there's a long way to go. What do you think will change or needs to change in order to make sure that Donald Trump doesn't win and that we don't slip into an autocracy, and that means Joe Biden winning the presidency again? What needs to change?
The answer really is the Democrats are preparing a case to present to the American people. And the American people are going to hear what the Democrats have to say, and they're going to hear what the Republicans have to say. And I can't predict the future. I was pointing out to somebody, here it is, March the 4th. And if I had told you on March 4th, 1968, that Johnson would withdraw, Kennedy and McCarthy would be challenging each other, that Bobby Kennedy would be killed, that Martin Luther King Jr. would be killed, none of that was predictable. And I think the unpredictability in American politics is clear. But understand, the issue of choice is going to be critical. Donald Trump did a very smart thing in saying that he favors in vitro fertilization. And we've talked about that in the past. And I will only tell you that he will have a problem on his right flank, I think. But the simple truth is what he said was very important because it diffuses, from the Republican Party point of view, they are not going to come out against in vitro fertilization. But American women and men are very concerned about the question of choice. You'll note that in France, they have now added an amendment to the Constitution just today, which puts the right of a woman to choose, the right to have an abortion, in their Constitution. And they did it, interestingly enough, as a reaction to the overthrow of Roe v. Wade in the United States. Yeah. So, there's so many things that will play out. We can't even speculate on the international situation. What will happen in the Middle East, what will happen with Russia. The murder of Navalny has had incredible implications, although buried by so much other news that is happening. And certainly the ongoing crisis in the Middle East is one which is of deep and profound concern. So, all of these issues will compound themselves between now and November, and we'll have to see how they're all addressed.
Yeah, I hope that issues such as reproductive choice do drive more people to the ballot than are traditionally the case, because it looks
we've already
at this
seen it.
point,
We've seen it in 8 states where the issue of a woman's right to choose has been predominant. And I have to tell you again, and I repeat this on the in vitro thing, one of the reasons Donald Trump came out against in vitro fertilization is because he can see the handwriting on the wall. But it makes it much tougher for the Republicans, because it was Donald Trump and his nominees to the Supreme Court who opened the door for the debate on in vitro fertilization. Let me just point out to you, there are so many issues and so many things that can happen between now and the election that we just have to sit back. I was asked again about the vice presidency, and it makes it very clear Kamala Harris will be the Democratic nominee for vice president. Who will Donald Trump choose? So far, the people who are on his list are all people who agree with him that he won the 2020 election and would have voted contrary to Mike Pence's ruling. They would have thrown a lot the Electoral College votes out. So this, and return them to the states, this is really an existential threat to American democracy. And so when I say this, and I want everybody to understand, I am not against the Republican Party. but I am against what Donald Trump has done. The Republican Party is not the Republican Party anymore. It's the party of Donald Trump. And when you have a